It would seem that what we call knowing is the place where raw quanta kind of becomes the truth, you know? I mean, knowing and believing and assuming, projecting are all different. Knowing feels unquestionably the most grounded, you know? Knowing. And we don't even need to know how a car works in detail to drive it. We don't need to know everything about reality to live in it. And we don't even need to know everything about ourselves, or really anything about ourselves, to go on as humans. I mean, I think about sometimes how little we have known in the past and still got along perfectly fine, you know. And very, very common the situation. Actually, it's probably more common than it isn't, that we involve ourselves with things for which we don't know all about, and it works out just fine. You know, like we fly all the time. We don't need to know about jet engines. We don't need to know the details of the flight plan. We just need to know where we are and where we want to go. And more often than not, it works out. But at the same time, there is definitely somebody who knows somewhere. It has to be the case. Maybe not on the level of reality and of the human, but in practical terms, for the things that we do, there has to be somebody who knows. The information has to be stored somewhere in some person. Some expert has to be able to act on what he knows, because maintenance is everything in a strange way. I mean, really, if we were to just stop maintaining, entropy would get the best of us. I mean, that's what depression is. That's what a lot of these different states are with people, you know, when you just kind of stop maintaining. It's almost like a person has this thing in them, this flame or this kind of surging thing, that if it stops even just temporarily, we kind of just give up a little on the maintenance. And the maintenance is what gets a person up every day and back to sleep at night, you know, over and over and over again. And during that 24-hour period, new things can happen, and what we think of as progress can be made, but maintenance always has to be there. It keeps what we know there. It keeps the evidence of what we know there and working. And strangely, if you are somebody who knows how your car works, it does actually kind of change the experience of driving. Like you have a different level of connection to the drive and to the vehicle, you know. It's subtle, but it's definitely there. You know what different sounds mean. You know intuitively almost when you need to change the oil. you have a different level of understanding, and when you can repair these things by yourself, it further connects you to that vehicle, you know. And what about knowing reality? I mean, how much can we even truly know? I mean, in the last video, it's like I said, there's like a near infinite number of true things at any given point. And we have our local area, and beyond that, we rely so heavily on the abstract, things that we will never physically touch, but are there nonetheless, you know, that are the truth. And it would be a stretch to call it an article of faith to believe those things, you know. There is a difference between the human life and knowing and not knowing. I sometimes go back to that Alan Watts quote, a fully known future is already the past. I mean, imagine if you knew your opposition's plays ahead of time. That would be tantamount to cheating. I mean, if you just... people would assume that you cheated, and they would more than likely be right, because it doesn't become knowing until it's happened. But if by some, let's say, magical means, you could just know ahead of time exactly the play that was going to unfold, and you could prepare your defense accordingly, and you stopped every single effort of the other team, the game would stop over time. People would stop playing with you. If you dominated so much that the other team could never even get a playoff, the game would end. Nobody would play with you. You're too dominant. You're so dominant that you may as well not even exist. It destroys the game. And that is true with, playing with even with animals, your dog, or kids. On some level, you have to let your dog or your kids or people who are smaller than you win a little. You're a full-grown adult. You're not seriously in combat with your kids, when you're kind of play fighting and wrestling and stuff. Like, you have to let them, air it out a little bit. You have to let them have this sense that maybe they are, maybe there's a chance that they could win. It's playing. Like, if you play with your dog as well, you have to throw the ball, and let him chase it. You can't just hold onto the ball, put it in your pocket, and be like, I won, and just completely dominate the game. You have to allow, even though you are completely, let's say the dominating force, or the force that is in control, you have to let uncertainty be there. That is the very definition of playing. But when you have two evenly matched teams, there has to be a huge unknown. And it has to become known, it has to become the truth through all of the near infinite variables that come together in the action in real time. It has to come to pass like that. And you might have a really dominant team one season, but other teams will look at that, practice and train to beat the strategy that got that team there in the next season. It's like a motivating thing. But if there was some realization that this team would never miss a shot and never lose, if they knew what you were going to do ahead of time somehow by some magical force, then it would cease to be. The game would be over. And in things like this, you can it kind of gives up the game a little bit. We can't know like that. That the best of knowing that we can ever get to is some approximation that gives us the ability to foresee and forecast and prepare and strategize, build around, work toward. But we can't fully and completely know. There are maybe a few exceptions. There are things that you can know so well that it's essentially true. There are some things that you can know so well and want so much that you would do anything for. And it's unacceptable to not have those things and involve yourself even with that person, let's say. And in that, the future is certain in a way, even though it is technically surrounded by the clouds of the unknown and uncertainty. And sometimes that can even get into things, it can get into one's mind. Things that are supposed to be certain can sometimes be shrouded by the permanence of the unknown. It can creep in and sort of color the landscape. And every once in a while, you need to be reminded that this is indeed certain, which is perfectly normal and perfectly human. We can kind of create things that are absolute, but there has to be a truth that underlies it. There has to be something that is kind of like an animating force, that really drives you. And imagine a situation where a crime has occurred and you can know every single detail of that crime. Knowing on that level sort of makes some of the processes we've developed over time redundant, because the processes that we've developed over time are almost solely dedicated to finding out what happened, to getting to the place of knowing and conveying that as well as possible, and seeing if we can get people to agree on that series of events. It's actually kind of amazing how much intellectual and psychological resources have been dedicated to that. And crazy as well, we didn't know there were atoms, and we didn't know there were cells. We didn't know we had hearts, and we knew there was something pounding in there, but we didn't know what it was. We didn't know about brains. We didn't know about all these things going on inside. But we could still live as humans, and at the same time, somehow knowing those things can subtly change the way we live as humans, and it can create experts in the field of maintenance for humans, whether it be psychological or broadly medical. And knowing about the planets and knowing about the moon, knowing about Earth, knowing about the depths of the oceans changes things. There was a time when France and Britain, they kind of assumed that they were on the very, very edge of reality itself, up against the oceans. And you may as well have thought of it as open space, because there was no way to cross them. It was like the end of the realm, And that's how it was thought of. When North America and South America were discovered, they were thought of as the New World. And that's exactly how it felt. An entirely new world. And to have these ships going across the ocean like that is similar in my mind to traversing space, Every time you try to go out into the water, you're just kind of sent back, and you slowly go further and further until you make vessels that are worthy, that can make that trip. And you think about all the things that are yet still unknown, but there, And it's interesting, as humans, we are this kind of filter that takes in some and leaves out others. And of the huge array of waves, of light, of color, of sound, of everything that can be detected, the human being picks up a limited amount, a small little band of each that is filtered, recreated in the brain electronically, and it's stable. But there's such a range of sound and color and smell and even taste that is left out. And that's fine. I actually like being a person, being human. And I've said in the past too, it's strange how reality stores previous events in itself, in the present. The evidence of things that have been are effectively stored in the current shape of things. And a thing like a human can come along and investigate it, research it, and know something because of that. And it really does change us. It's a different experience in life to be wise than it is to be foolish. at least all the time. I think a wise person is completely capable of foolishness. Actually, sometimes prefers it, because it's just such a different state. It's such a less serious state. And I always say there's like a time and a place. There is a time and a place. You have to know. Part of wisdom is knowing when it's time to be serious and when it's time not to be serious. A wise person can see things pretty close to objectively and is able to see events as events and have no personal attachment to those events. But that's no way to live all the time, I think it's the eventual situation of a wise person to become deeply and hopelessly attached to many things. It's like the final stage. And it's interesting too, what we come to know. We can't help but symbolize. We have to. And how much that changes things, we have the ability to know something. I mean, really know something too. Like, there's a certain point in us, I think, when we hear a certain amount of words or read a certain amount of words that finally pushes something into the category of known. It's almost like there's a certain threshold, because we certainly don't just hear something and instantly know it and completely believe it. That would be strange, to be honest. But what about people who are completely trustworthy, who we trust very, very deeply? That's kind of different. It's kind of like, in those situations when those people speak, it's like it just instantly becomes known. It becomes factual, true. And that's why I always say it's so important to, get it right. I mean, I remember in a video a long time ago I said, what would it be like to go out into the world and just say the opposite of the truth to everybody that you spoke to? How long could a person sustain that and bring into their life any kind of desirable or wanted situations and relationships with people? I don't even think you would get one unless there was the kind of once in a while person who realized you were playing some kind of game and was curious enough to be like, what are you doing? But even that, there's no guarantee that anything sincere would come along. And how much can we know? How much can human beings know? It's like going into the Amazon and walking through it to get to a point to where nothing in there was alien. There are people who have lived there for a long time. I wonder if in their day-to-day experience it's all known. I wonder if they still encounter things that are completely alien and strange. But even then, the next level of storage and study, that's really the thing about the West. One of the, I guess you could say, gifts that the West developed in spades was study, research. Because that is not a normal state for humans, at least for the longest time. To set out to study something specific, to research it, to really push it into the category of known. people have gone to such great lengths. And there's something about it that is life-giving, knowing. In the Bible, it specifically says, too, that it's up to humans to find and name everything on Earth, which is a bizarre and specific thing to say. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, definitely. I totally get that, because if we didn't do that, we would be in a loop. Like, linear time, in a strange way, almost depends on naming, categorizing, documenting, and knowing. It's almost like without that, linear time would be non-existent or fragmented in some way. It's almost like linear time, history itself, is pending up against, in some form, documentation, categorization, and truly knowing. Up until then, the beasts and plants and things we meet in the wild, surely they've been seen and known by plenty of people over time, but they get lost again. I mean, who was the first person to see a rhino or a gator or a bald eagle? We don't really know. And they became known in some limited way, enough to clearly be the truth. The fact of their existence became known to somebody at some point, but to the extent of their documentation and their study was very limited for a long time. Like, that sort of thinking, it is kind of like a shift in the quest, or even the beginning of the quest, to make reality known. And that is, in my opinion, heavily because of the Bible, which is strange. These scientists really did have as a huge part of their motivation to find out how this centralized intelligence, this architect, for whom we were created in its likeness, how it did it. What were its methods? What is this stuff made out of? How did it get here? What is going on? We need to get as much of this as we can known. We need as many words as possible that are as true as possible describing reality. And we need to get it down. We need pictures. We need missions of people to go out and study, confirm, and verify these things. And we need people who care enough to teach it again and again and again and again and again in these institutions, in these schools. But we didn't know, as a side effect, that would turn into industry, the Industrial Revolution. I don't think we really knew that part of the effect of finding out what is happening would lead us to the ability to kind of manipulate things. And manipulate is kind of a negative word, I guess you could say. I don't think it's really the right word. To rearrange things, to disassemble and rearrange things, to basically use things as material. And chemistry being so foundational to what became one of the most important elements of knowing. It's not quite on the atomic level, but the atomic level is an important element. It's right there. It's the chemical level. And man, like, figuring this stuff out was a massive breakthrough that could even be done. And it all came from knowing. And it's like I've said in the past, like, everything that we have today, all these, my computer here, my desk, I see pens, cologne, books, paper, the material for all this stuff has always been here on Earth for the whole time that humans have been here, and before. The material has all been here. We just didn't know that you could rearrange things and assemble them like this. It's like what a breakthrough that is in comprehending what reality is and what humans are. And I would have loved to have been there for the first person to, like, pick up a sharp thing in haste while battling some kind of animal and shank it. And it's like this eureka moment. It's like, okay, I see, or maybe you see a friend or even a family member get mauled by some beast of nature who has these giant sharp teeth, and you're like, oh, okay, I see. That those teeth are big, and the claws, and they do that. And you kind of look at your skin, and you're like, this is kind of sensitive. I gotta protect this. This red stuff comes pouring out, and that doesn't look good. And it slowly starts to enter into knowing a little bit more and a little bit more, And I'm sure before that point, such a person might have cut themselves on something or hit their toe, slowly starting to realize what we are, slowly starting to realize that I have trillions, hundreds of billions of nerve endings all throughout my body. I'm very sensitive to my environment. I can feel everything, from the temperature to wind gusts. I can hear the sounds. I can almost taste the air. And I consume this environment, and it's trying to consume me too. And it slowly starts to become known. It's almost like before that, you can understand how things go on an instinctual level before they become on the level of the known, to where it becomes this linear thing. It's like it gets pieced together for time and history itself to exist. It has to leave the realm of the instinctual, because instinctual is in spurts, situational, and does not document, does not investigate, and it does not store, doesn't teach, doesn't accrue wisdom, but we still do have instincts. So they're an important part of what we are and what we do. But the next level is interested in knowing. And it creates this kind of linear thing where these pieces fit together almost like multiple gears that eventually form this larger cohesive machine, and the elements need to come together. And at first I'm sure they were by accident, that they must have been, of course, but so much relies too on the documentation, like I was saying, and more relies on larger and larger groups of people getting together. I sometimes wonder, I would be very, very happy to just be this space of awareness, of consciousness, that can just kind of float over any point on Earth at any time, that has the ability to kind of go through history and go through time and just watch, just watch what happened and how it happened, and see the look in people's faces when they found this and found that, just out of curiosity. Because I personally, even though those events are come and gone, the evidence of those events having come to pass are stored here now for me to infer. The fact that I am here surrounded by what I'm surrounded by, the history books are the history books, and this time thing has come to pass how it's come to pass, it gives me the ability to infer what happened, because the traces of it are here. But it is still not fully known exactly how it happened. And that's the thing. That's that little fine, elusive point. And a lot of our endeavors are still trying to find adequate forms of collection and representation with words and symbols. But it makes me wonder too, because I've seen some more science fiction type things where, people have eyes on them all the time. And there's something kind of violating about that too, that we don't seem to like, because we don't really want things to be fully known. Being fully known for you, the ability for you to know everything, means the loss of privacy for another. So there's this kind of balance, as there always is, between what you can know and what is somebody else's to have, and for you to never know. And that's kind of going to be the line into the future, isn't it? I mean, how easy it would be to solve crime if every person was always being watched. But is that a reasonable situation? Is the cost worth it? I don't know. It seems like there's other ways to have less crime than to watch people all the time. Like in the science fiction situation, the people had an evolution of the cell phone where your eyelids were essentially covered with this see-through apparatus that recorded everything that you see. And at any point in time, you could go through what a person has experienced and, watch the events that unfolded, thereby making their experience known, at least on the visual level. And it made it very difficult for people to commit crime. But at the same time, it's like when you hear something like that, it's easy to be like, to recoil. And we spend so much time. That's why I like sports. We have numerated so much. Part of what makes us better and better and better was the location of numbers and the application of numbers. I mean, what a thing, dude. Like, imagine if we didn't keep score in sports. We didn't, keep wins and losses. We didn't keep shots missed, shots made. We didn't keep steals. We didn't keep statistics. It would change the game. Knowing these things changes the game. It changes strategy and planning, and even practice. It changes practical application on the floor. If you know that you're on a streak, having gotten 5 steals per game for the last 15, 20 games, it's going to affect your effort and steals on the next game. Knowing that you even have a streak going motivates you to keep it going. If you're on a winning streak, if you've won 20 games in a row, that 21st game is different. And you feel different about losses if you know how many you have. It just changes your moment-to-moment experience simply by knowing these things. And another fascinating thing about these days is the fact that we have numerated so much of economic activity, so much so the quote-unquote economy is now this massive abstract concept separated from actual transactions between people. I mean, it's still obviously strongly associated to it. It still does a good job of representing trade, but it also exists as this abstract concept as well. And what a thing that is, psychically as well. The economy is such a massive portion of what we talk about when it comes to politics and the day-to-day business of a country, of a place, of a people. The economy is important, GDP per capita, production, projections. Every quarter has to be higher. And these things have to be kept track of. But that phase, that period of time, in my opinion, is a ruthless requirement that is the prelude to even any kind of possible utopia. And I don't even like that word, man. It's too idealistic and it's too kind of nebulous. But I think quote-unquote capitalism, I don't even like that word. Wasn't that coined by Karl Marx? I don't like the idea of Karl Marx coining the economies of the West and what they are. It just doesn't seem right. But yeah, it seems like this period of time with Western democracies as such, Western economies as such, being able to exist and numerate, record, document, grow, adapt, change, and become is a requirement as a prelude to create the conditions for some sort of utopia. And it just seems like a natural outgrowth of massive, massive production, high quality, and the overall expansion and growth of living conditions over time seems like a good thing so far. I mean, we often point at the cost of these things, which is a completely valid thing to point at, but as we point to those things, we're also at the same time minimizing them. So we're doing our best to raise the gains and lower the cost, which is a constant thing that we're always concerned with. Whether it's sports or the economy or even our day-to-day lives, we're trying to minimize pain, maximize pleasure, so to speak, if that's even the right word, probably not. But all at the same time, this hinges on knowing. The ability to forecast what is to come hinges greatly on knowing. But at the same time, like I said, a fully known future is already the past. The unknown is a required element to keep us going in a strange way. There's only one circumstance where knowing changes a little bit, and I think that's love. Love is so certain. And even with something like love between two people that are involved with it, there's still the unknown that haunts us. What if you lose them? What if something happens to them? It's the most tragic thought. And that is with the arrival of love that these unknowns start to arrive and haunt somebody. But those things even seem to strengthen the fact of love. And I always think that that's going to be the case.